Well, I know a lot of our listeners are also Dateline murder mystery people and
Yes.
so on, and you're kind of living the life there,
Yeah.
helping people solve these crimes and helping your students learn how to do that. Talk about the cold case project you're working.
We came up with this wonderful idea where we could bridge our two groups together and use my best students as interns to help them work on real cold cases.
My name's Kelly Damphousse. I'm the president here. I am the host of The Current. And today I'm really excited about having my friend Jaymi Elsass join us. Jaymi is an associate professor in the Department of Criminal Justice and Criminology. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
Now, it is associate professor
Of instruction.
of instruction. They're very good. So glad to have you here. So we're excited to have you talk about some of what you're doing in the classroom, but also what you're doing for research. But before we get there, I always want to know about people's Texas State stories. So let's start about where Jaymi started and then how you got here, and then we'll talk about what you're doing. So tell us where you grew up first.
Absolutely. So I grew up in a small town in South Texas outside of Corpus, and I graduated from high school.
Okay, what's the small town?
Ingleside,
Okay, what's the mascot?
the Mustangs.
The Mustangs. Okay, very good. All right.
Graduated
Were you
from
involved
there.
in like athletics or
Yes, it's a
extracurricular
small
stuff?
school, so we
Everybody
did
has to do everything,
all
right?
the things,
Yeah.
right, correct. And then graduated from there at 17 and went to the University of Texas at Austin for my undergraduate career. Did 4 years in sociology. There is where I actually met Dr. Mark Stafford for the first time.
Sure.
And he, I just really built a really strong friendship and relationship with him, looked up to his research, and eventually followed him to Texas State for both my master's and my doctorate.
Now, were you thinking about going to graduate school when you first went to college, or it just kind of
Absolutely
happened?
not. I
No.
was thinking about going, first I thought about going into medical school because my entire family is in medicine. Fell in love with sociology, took a class on a whim.
Why not? right?
Absolutely.
I think you're the first sociologist on the podcast, by
Yeah.
the way,
Oh,
except not
wonderful.
counting me. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And then thought, okay, well, I guess I'll go to law school maybe because I'm interested in the criminology point of this. And then fell in love with research through working with Dr. Stafford. And now we went through, as I said, he moved to Texas State. He's now here, right, at the School of Criminal Justice and Criminology. I came and got my master's and my PhD under him, and then was hired out of our PhD program in my final ABD, my final semester, to become full faculty here at Texas State. So it's been my home for a long time now.
So when did you finish school? When did you graduate?
I graduated in 2015 with my
2015.
PhD.
Okay.
But
Very
I've
good.
been at this university since 2008.
Okay, so quick question. What was your master's topic, and then what was your PhD topic?
Yes, my master's topic is on deviance amongst juveniles, particularly.
Same with me. Same thing.
I love
Yep.
it, particularly a court and case precedent. And then my PhD really focused on outliers of juvenile behaviors, mainly nonconformists. So high rate offenders, and then those interesting people who never offend or maybe only offend later in life.
Yeah. I think we've talked about this before, that my master's thesis was on youthful involvement in Satanism. It was like, I think the title was, Did the devil make them do it, or something like that. But then, started talking about what offshoots of that, like how did law enforcement, manage occult crime back in the 80s and 90s, and the development of moral panics, which is an area of interest for you as
Absolutely.
well. Talk about, what is a moral panic?
Yeah, so moral panic is really interesting because when you look at research, typically we only know they happen after they've already occurred.
Yeah.
They typically have this historical view. And so we see media involvement, we see public interest that heavily focus on one really scary thing, whatever that scary thing may be. We see public concern, ramp up very quickly. We see disproportional outpouring of concern or response to whatever that scary thing is, and then we tend to see these wane off over time. So as you said, satanic panic is a well-studied, right, moral panic, but we also see moral panic historically about drug use and abuse, the crack cocaine epidemic, and in my research, I look at the moral panic surrounding mass shootings specifically.
Well, the interesting thing is that crime tends to be relatively stable, and sometimes you'll get peaks here and there. But when the media pays attention to something, then the stories start to feed off each other. They start telling the same story, and then the public starts thinking, oh my goodness, there's all these Satanists everywhere. And so that was actually the stimulus for my thesis. Was I was in church one day, and the pastor said, man, there's all these Satanists all over Texas right now. I said, well, there's a thesis topic, and turns out there weren't any more than there were before, but there was this story that there was, and the stories kind of escalated, and that created this kind of moral panic. We call this satanic panic in the 1980s and 90s. So that's really interesting. And so your area was in mass shootings.
Mass shootings,
so
correct.
Now mass shootings have been increasing over time?
They have, but not as much as you would believe.
Yeah.
We still have just over 22 incidents a year around there that fit our definition of mass shootings. And so while we do see them increasing, in fact, I work with the Rockefeller Center group against gun violence, and so one of the things, the research on gun violence, and one of the things that we do is track these over time with a blog coming out later next month that's looking at our data set and tracking these over time and what we can tell about them.
So you've been studying this area, and then your dissertation was on, remind me again?
My dissertation was on outliers of juvenile behavior.
The outliers thing, yeah. So that's really interesting. So what was your data?
We used AdHealth to look at what kinds of people are on the outskirts of behavior, because most juveniles commit minor offenses. And so what I was really interested in are not necessarily those high rate offenders, those ones who commit lots and lots of crimes, but I was very interested in the juveniles who are different in that they rarely commit crime or never commit crime in their lifetime, are abstainers, if you will, or pure conformists. And they're very interesting to me because usually when we see them commit crime finally later in life, we have a tendency for those crimes to be more serious than this minor offending that most people desist out of naturally as, rambunctious kids getting into trouble. So they're kind of different, and I think it actually may have a bleed over into my research on moral panics and mass shootings later on.
Well, what's interesting, you oftentimes hear about a shooting incident, for example, that involved a young person. Mm-hmm. They go, he was the quietest person. Like, you never would have expected this in a million years, and something happened.
Right.
And I always wonder, and I think we all wonder, like, what happened to get someone to go from here to there where you're conforming, and we spend our whole lives learning how to conform. Mm-hmm. And then all of a sudden something happens, and they don't just deviate a little bit, they go all the way and do something that is unimaginable.
Right. And what's interesting about that is that they're actually not conforming as teenagers, because the normative behavior is deviance. As Strange says, criminal behavior is minor, but it's normal. It's, minor shoplifting, it's experimenting with alcohol, it's things like that. And these people aren't doing that. So we're actually seeing them not conform to
So they're super
peers.
Conforming
To
beyond,
society, but not to what's normative behavior for peers. And we actually have two groups of conformists: those who are conforming because they're kind of that stereotypical all-American kid who is getting great grades and top of their class, that kind of thing. And then we have these others. They're not failing, but they're not doing great. They're not involved in anything. They just kind of fly under the radar, and they never break the law. And that's really interesting.
Wow, that is interesting. And again, the question is, what is the trigger for that?
Right.
And I think it is actually interesting. When I first started studying criminology and deviant behavior, it seems like early crim theories were about why do people deviate, and I actually aspire or think more about why do people conform, because the natural impulse is to deviate, because
Correct.
we're selfish beings by nature,
Right.
and it is normal, as you say, to deviate a little, and until we get socialized not to do certain things. But then in the cases you're talking about, they have become so over-socialized, perhaps, that they are, tamping it all in, and maybe that's part of the issue, right? Because they're so socialized that there's no relief to whatever anxiety they're facing, that it just comes out in an extreme at some point.
Yes, it's really, really interesting. And just like you, I have the question of what makes people conform.
Yeah.
And so flipping that on its head gives you a whole new perspective on this kind of life course trajectory of deviance that we've always accepted through life course theories.
Is there two pathways to adult criminality? Is it people learn how to engage in deviant behavior and they kind of carry that on to adulthood? Or is it also common to have late onset?
Neither one are common.
Yeah.
The most common path is that the vast majority of people commit crime normally as juveniles, and they naturally desist from crime as they age. However,
because we're not eventually we're not all committing crime, right?
Right.
The conforming is the most common response when we become adults.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
We do have
I'm not going to judge anybody else, but that's typically what happens.
Yes.
You might speed.
Right.
You might do something else pretty small. You might fudge on your taxes or something like that, but you're not robbing banks and
Exactly.
so on. Yeah.
And you stopped doing those crimes without anybody teaching you through therapy that you needed to stop, or without being locked up. The majority of people desist naturally.
Yeah,
They grow up. They grow out of it.
And the question is what? You grow out of it, but what else might cause you to just stop doing those things?
Typically, we see things like, you have more to lose.
Yeah,
Maybe you're going to college, or you're in the military. You have a job, you have a house, you have a wife or husband or kids, right? You have more to lose if you get in trouble. And so as we age, we gain more stature in the community, we gain more relationships and reputation, and we have more to lose.
You've got these social bonds that you've created, and you don't want to lose your job or your prestige or whatever.
Right.
There's a level of maturity as well, too. I think maybe losing a sense of narcissism, or gaining a sense of other people are valuable.
Absolutely.
And you shouldn't just take their stuff.
We know
and respect
empathy
other
develops later in life,
empathy,
right?
Yeah. But so what about the other case, though?
Yeah. So on one end of the spectrum, then, if you think about it as kind of like a normal bell curve, right? On one end of the spectrum, we have high rate offenders who are committing crimes, and a lot of crimes, and a lot of different kinds of crimes as juveniles, and they're more likely to carry that behavior into adulthood and become adult criminals.
That becomes their personality, their social milieu, it's just who they are.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And on the other end, we have about 10%, that we've known this since the 1950s, 10% of people who do not break the law as juveniles at all. So they're already rare. They're not engaging. Now, we don't know if it's because they don't have friends, they're quieter, so they don't have opportunity for behavior, because we know juvenile crime, right? Delinquency is group behavior typically. And so we don't know if it's because of that or some other reason, but for whatever reason, they're not breaking the law. Of that 10%, we have two distinct groups. We have a group that are choosing, right, to not break the law. It's a conscious choice to not engage in those behaviors. We typically see them as kind of your all-American kid stereotype, right? The kind of kid we all want our kids to be. And the other group, as I said earlier, they're not getting great grades, but they're not failing. They're not involved in any activities. They're just the person who flies under the radar. When I talk to my students about this, I say, those of you who are from small schools, you look back at your high school yearbook and you think, I don't remember that person, but you were with them for years in school because they just kind of flew under the radar. Those are the ones that are very interesting to me about what criminality looks like and other forms of deviance for them later in life.
Yeah, in my Satanism study, I interviewed, I think, 120 or so kids that said they were involved in Satanism, and the common trait was being a loner, but also being very intelligent, because you have to read a lot of these books that kind of get you involved in it and so on, and have really low self-esteem, like they don't like themselves, other people don't like them, which leads them to becoming loners and so on. They're searching out for people who will accept them, and they found a group that would accept them, and so they went from just being someone that nobody knew about to all of a sudden doing things that are, things you wouldn't believe they were doing.
Right.
In addition to your research, you're also doing something I think is really cool, and actually something that can have a huge impact on the state of Texas. And that's something that we think is really important at Texas State, that we are not just teaching people, but we're actually engaging in a process of making Texas better by educating a future workforce, but also about improving the lot of our people's lives. And so talk about the cold case project you're working on.
Absolutely. So it starts with me becoming the coordinator for the internship program for the School of Criminal Justice and Criminology 3 years ago. I took that program over at both the undergraduate and the master's level, and during that first year, I built a strong relationship with the head prosecutor for the Cold Case and Missing Persons Unit at the Texas Attorney General's office. And through offhand conversations over dinner, right, that's how a lot of work gets done,
exactly,
right?
The networking part
Absolutely.
of this.
We came up with this wonderful idea where we could bridge our two groups together and use my best students as interns to help them work on real cold cases that the Attorney General's office has been given from other agencies. So it's very interesting. The Cold Case and Missing Persons Unit wasn't developed at the Attorney General's office until 2021. So it is a very new unit, and it's small, less than 15 people in the entire unit, and that includes administrative staff. That's everybody.
And that's the state level.
That's the state
level.
level.
Are there cold case units in city police departments
There
and things
are
like that?
in large departments, but the
Yeah.
problem is that most of Texas is rural. We're talking
Yeah.
small departments, and they just don't have the resources or the background for these kinds of difficult
Yeah.
cases. Additionally, they don't have the finances to have a full-time cold case detective, and then things like forensic testing are just cost prohibitive. They just don't know what to do.
And many times they're not used to dealing with a murder scene and may not have collected really good data on it.
Absolutely.
And so the evidence is scant. And so, yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And so what we do is we take on the cold cases that get referred to us by those agencies. And so the Cold Case and Missing Persons Unit, when we got to talking, we realized there are over 20,000 unsolved homicides in the state of Texas alone. And that number's 5 years old now.
Wow.
So it's surely gone up, over 300,000 nationwide. This is a huge issue. We just don't have the resources and manpower for it. And I thought, I have some incredibly bright students with wonderful skills who can help. And we built this internship program, and so now they go on a year-long internship. I have 4 students working over there. They were split into 2 teams, each given a case with all the raw material under the guise of an investigator, right, or the helping hand of an investigator, and said, go.
Wow.
Right? And they have done amazing work. Actually sat in on their presentations this morning before coming here.
I'm guessing some of the cases were just a body was found and just identifying the body is the issue.
Many times that's what the CCMPU is dealing with, yes. Now, for my students, each team got cases that they'd just been referred to the Attorney General. As I said, they're not an original jurisdiction, so smaller agencies are reaching out for help. Both of those cold cases are from the mid-1990s. One has multiple victims, the other has a single victim, but both those cases have gone cold because all leads have been exhausted.
Yeah.
And now they've reached out for the Attorney General's office for help, and they said, hey, these are great cases for your students to work on, and they have made amazing progress. I was blown away this morning.
So they're potentially solvable.
Absolutely.
With some time and some effort, maybe new technology that's being discovered and being implemented.
Yes, absolutely. And both of these cases have DNA, so we have the things that can be retested for DNA, because there's been quite a bit of DNA testing in both, but we'll have some retesting as well as some opportunities for the growing field of forensic genealogy.
I want to talk about that because I think
Yes.
that's the most exciting advancement in science and criminology is forensic DNA, about how you can use someone's DNA to track them. Yeah. So talk about a little bit about that.
Yes. So both of these cases that my students are working have the opportunity for forensic genealogy and to use DNA that's found at these crime scenes to turn into something like GEDmatch, where we can look at these cases and maybe we can't find the perpetrator themselves, but we can find someone who's related to the perpetrator. And then we use family trees, documents like marriage documents, birth and death documents to build these family trees and whittle things down till we have a suspect.
I did 23andMe because I'm adopted, and I was like trying to track down who my family was, and I just thought it would tell me. I wasn't trying to track down my family, but I was trying to figure out who I was.
Yeah.
Genetically. And I thought it would just say, well, you're from this part of the country, and I did that, or from the world, and I did that, and I didn't like scroll down to find out that you could like click on a link, and it would take you to like
Family
who you're
member.
related to.
Right.
Until last summer, I ran into someone who told me through 23andMe they had tracked down their family, and she said, haven't you done that? And I said, no. So I went back and I had to change passwords and so on, but I finally got back, and I've discovered a woman whose her mother and my birth mother were sisters. Now they've got to be like 85 years old or something
Right.
like that now. And I'm like, I want to get into it, but it was amazing. I can look at the tree and I can see this. And so if you got a piece of DNA, you can find out maybe the person who is somehow in the registry, or who's related to that person, and say
Right.
that's a second cousin or a cousin perhaps, or a brother or
Absolutely.
sister. That's how that all works.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes, it's just amazing. And support for this program, when we started it, it has just exploded. So when we first opened this up, I had over 100 applicants in a 2-week period, and we whittled it down to choose 4 really bright, amazing students. And this year, we just finishing up our first year, so our pilot year is done. We're starting our second year, and we've had just as much interest. And so we're in the process now of the second group. But another thing that this has done is it's led to broader conversations with the Attorney General's office about what else we can do to help cold case. And so we are in the process of the School of Criminal Justice and Criminology of developing a center for cold case investigations and a cold case professional association, neither of which exist at this point, which will allow practitioners and researchers to really work together on things like best practices, right? And connect networking these smaller agencies with experts in the field who can help them solve these cases that they otherwise would not have access to. And I just think it's huge for Texas State to be able to see this gap and say, we can help here. We can fill this problem.
Making Texas better, right?
Absolutely.
So I know it's pretty new, but success stories yet?
We do have some interesting developments. I'm not able to say much, but I can tell you that we have been absolutely blown away by the work these students have done, how far they've pushed these cases forward. And while we haven't solved one yet, success looks like so many things with cold cases, right? It can be excluding somebody who's been a suspect, right?
How great is it to have that burden off your shoulder?
Absolutely. It can be finding new evidence, right? And so we have all of this really interesting stuff that they've done, but I'm unfortunately have to be tight-lipped at this point.
Well, it's exciting to see Texas State kind of like leading the way in this area, and to see our students getting real-world experience. We often talk about learning in the classroom and how valuable it is, but there's something to be said about what you can learn outside the classroom as well. And in this case, you're connecting them with police officers, investigators, who are giving them this hands-on experience that will ultimately lead to they got to get a job when they graduate, right? And this would be a great one to get.
It is. And, we're seeing this. Of course, we're working heavily on investigations. We have Dr. Kim Rossmo just published a new investigations book, and he launched a new master's and PhD level cold case investigations course. So we're putting a lot into investigations. Of course, that's, in addition to his geospatial intelligence and investigations center here that's already here at Texas State. But we're doing the same thing in all areas of CJ. So we created the new Texas Crime and Justice Center, which focuses on solving problems and looking at best practices for Central Texas criminal justice agencies. So that's a really exciting development. We're also are creating a new scholarly journal that focuses on criminal justice case studies, and that doesn't exist at this point. So that allows us to further bridge that gap between us and those practitioner boots on the ground. We've got the Texas Justice Court Center. We've got the Texas Municipal Education Center, right? We've got all of these incredible initiatives to put our students into the field, not only get them to learn hands-on, because as you said, there's something great about learning hands-on out in the field, but to also help them start networking and to teach them to give back, right? They're already helping the state of Texas and our communities before they ever even graduate. And that buy-in is so important for the long term, because criminal justice has high burnout because it's a hard job. So the more we can get buy-in and get them to love what they do and give back early, the longer they stay in the field working to better our communities.
Well, I know a lot of our listeners are also Dateline murder mystery people and so on, and you're kind of living the life there, helping people solve these crimes and helping your students learn how to do that.
Absolutely.
Oftentimes we're talking to alumni or we're talking to faculty members, and in this case, it's a double dip. We get alumnus who's doing great. We're so glad to have you here at Texas State, and we're so excited to see what you're doing here and how you're helping our students get a really special experience. So thank you for doing that.
Thank you so much.
All right, Jaymi, so now we got something kind of fun to do. Every week we ask listeners to send us a question that you get to ask me. So you get to be the podcast host. So I'm going to give it to you.
Okay.
And I never see the questions in advance, so it's always cold. And so
I love this question. It's, what's one thing that you are deeply grateful for?
Oh, I'm grateful for everything. I lead a life of gratefulness because I didn't expect to be where I am. And when I get a chance to talk to young people, they always like, how do you become a college president? And I said, don't do what I did, because I didn't know what I was doing. But I always share about the fact that there are people in my life who were standing at a fork in the road. And my inclination was to go to the left, and they said, no, you should go to the right. And sometimes they were very insistent on me going to the right or to the left, whatever direction they thought I should go. And those people changed my life forever. And so you talked a little bit about networking, the importance of that. Sometimes young people don't think about, the importance of networking, or it sounds like kind of, you're using people to gain advantage. But it's important not just who you know, but who knows you.
Absolutely.
When opportunities kind of open themselves up to people, they say, hey, I know a person that might be a perfect fit for this. And so my thankfulness is those people that invested in me, that I would like. Sometimes I feel like, why do you care about me? Like, I don't know why you did this, but it reminds me then about my responsibility, that I have a responsibility to pay them back.
Right.
And so my thankfulness turns into an opportunity to invest in other people like I was invested in. What about you? What are you thankful for?
Yeah, I think I echo a lot of what you say, and then also I'm very thankful for such a strong husband at home. I have 4 small children, as I mentioned earlier, and so someone who has been my biggest cheerleader and supporter through all of this. Those 5 people, my 4 kids and my husband, are my reason why. They're my people. Yeah.
You know, I think people forget that other people have lives. I remember thinking the first time I saw my teacher in a grocery store, I was like, Mrs. Johnson, what are you doing here?
Right.
You shouldn't even be in the classroom waiting for me to come back. And I think people say, oh, there's a professor at the university, and forget that in addition to doing that, and you're doing a lot of things, like not just teaching, you got research, you got this cold case deal you're doing, but you also have a life out there, right? And you have to balance all those things, or try to manage the imbalance. So
yeah, I'm grateful for a strong partner that helps me do. My husband helps me do all of that.
Well, thanks so much, Jaymi, for joining us, and thank you for joining us as well. This is always a great time for us to learn from our faculty, staff, students, alumni about what's going on here at Texas State. It's also especially cool when you got one of our alumni who is also a faculty member to share about the great things happening here at Texas State. Join us again next time at The Current when we come back to learn more about what's happening at Texas State University. State's up, everyone.